Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're looking at the world through the lens of the iceberg model. Because, those surface-level narratives we're constantly reading in the headlines every single day, they are literally just the tip of the iceberg. And beneath the waterline, they're often hiding some incredibly deep, systemic, and honestly sometimes pretty shocking truths about how wealth, technology, and our society actually operate.
And that brings us right to the core question driving our whole exploration today. Think about this for a second. What happens when the myths we build around innovation completely blind us to the complex realities lurking beneath the surface? Today's explainer is designed to plunge us directly beneath that waterline. We're going to unpack the hidden structural plumbing of our modern world, and I promise you, by the time we wrap this up, you are going to look at your daily news feed in a completely different way.
Part 1. The Myth of the Omnigenius.
So, leadership expert Gautam Mukunda points out this really fascinating reality, which is that success basically doesn't exist in a vacuum. It needs context. Just because someone totally crushes it in one highly specific arena, it very rarely translates perfectly to another. But we constantly fall for this myth, right? And it's because of something called the halo effect. It's this sneaky cognitive bias where one massive positive quality basically skews our perception of a person's entirely unrelated traits. Think about the Marvel universe for a second. It's like Bruce Banner casually dropping the fact that he has 7 PhDs. It's our culture's shorthand way of expecting brilliant leaders to just be these omnipotent experts in absolutely everything, from advanced biomechanics to complex foreign policy. But as we all know, reality is much, much messier than a comic book.
And we've actually been able to observe this halo effect crashing headfirst into reality recently. Take the newly formed Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Led by some incredibly highly successful private sector figures, they came in and made these sweeping cuts to various federal agencies. We're talking about firing workers at the National Nuclear Security Administration, cutting 9/11 responder healthcare programs, really big moves. But then, interestingly, the administration ended up reversing a lot of those specific cuts less than 48 hours later. And why? Well, it was once the highly specialized, critical day-to-day functions of those exact workers were fully understood. It's a perfect example that being wildly successful in the private sector doesn't just automatically translate into, say, an instant understanding of complex nuclear waste management.
Part 2. Deconstructing the Emerald Mine.
To really see how these massive cultural myths get built, let's deconstruct one of the most famous ones out there right now, the Emerald Mine story surrounding Elon Musk's origins. We've got to separate verifiable historical fact from what is essentially pure internet fiction. Now, based directly on a really comprehensive investigation done by Snopes, we can actually trace this rumor chronologically. It largely sparked back in 2018 with a pair of Business Insider South Africa articles that claimed Musk's family owned an emerald mine. Throughout 2019 and 2020, Musk repeatedly and honestly pretty vehemently denied this online. Then, in a really interesting twist in mid-2020, that original Business Insider article actually retroactively corrected its own headline. They changed it from saying his family owns an emerald mine to they once owned a stake in an emerald mine.
Which brings us to the verified facts of the situation. It's like two completely different realities. On one side, you've got this pervasive internet rumor, the idea that infinite blood emerald seed money bankrolled Musk's entire modern empire. But on the other side, we have the impartial, Snopes-verified reality. Did his estranged father, Errol, briefly own a stake in a Zambian mine in the 1980s? Yes. However, and this is absolutely crucial, there is zero verifiable evidence that this money funded Elon Musk's businesses. In fact, reliable reports confirm he actually arrived in Canada as a teenager with only roughly $2,500 to his name.
And to put the final nail in the coffin of that unlimited inherited seed money illusion, Musk actually graduated college with roughly $100,000 in student debt. He funded his education through loans, through scholarships, and by working various jobs. It's just a really powerful reminder for all of us of why we have to look past the loudest, most viral online narratives to find the actual foundational facts.
Part 3. The subsidized innovation paradox.
But hey, the official narratives aren't always the whole story either. There's this really fascinating paradox we need to look at. This tension between a fiercely self-made anti-government public persona and a business empire that is, in reality, heavily reliant on federal subsidies.
Let's actually break down the public funds that helped build giants like Tesla and SpaceX. We are looking at $11.4 billion in regulatory credits. There's a massive $1.8 billion contract from the National Reconnaissance Office, plus up to $12 billion in future contracts. And maybe most critically, way back in 2010, Tesla received a $465 million low-interest loan from the Department of Energy. Former employees have actually noted that without that specific government lifeline during a period of really severe cash flow issues, Tesla might not have survived at all.
When you step back and pull all of this together, the scale of it is just staggering. A Washington Post investigation estimates that at least $38 billion in various government support, subsidies, and contracts have flowed to these companies over the past 2 decades. $38 billion. That is a breathtaking amount of taxpayer funding acting as the literal bedrock for what is so often portrayed as purely private sector innovation.
And this paradox gets even deeper when we look at some recent political actions. Reports indicate that the Department of Government Efficiency specifically targeted the staffing and authority of certain federal agencies. We're talking about agencies like the NLRB, the SEC, and the FAA. What makes this so incredibly notable is that these specific agencies concurrently had active oversight roles or ongoing investigations into labor disputes, safety records, and launch approvals regarding SpaceX and Tesla. It's a complex, multi-layered situation that definitely warrants a closer look beneath the surface.
Part 4, Neuralink, Ethics and Risks.
Okay, moving away from financial structures and plunging into the extreme edges of human evolution, we encountered the sheer, mind-bending scale of the technical leap happening with brain-computer interfaces. To put this in perspective, current deep brain stimulation technology reads about 10 electrodes. Neuralink's device, the Link, uses microthreads that are literally the size of human neurons to implant 10,000 electrodes directly into the somasensory section of the brain. 10,000! This allows it to read incredibly complex brainwave states, like gamma waves for problem solving, or theta waves for drowsiness, and it translates the deepest, quietest signals of the human mind directly into machine code. It's like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, but it's happening right now. But of course, this presents us with a massive, unprecedented ethical crossroads. Think about it like a giant scale. On one side, you have the utilitarian approach, doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Neuralink's stated goal is to treat severe brain diseases, potentially curing blindness or restoring mobility to paralyzed individuals. I mean, those are literal medical miracles. But on the other side of the scale, we have the rights-based approach. If an implant in your brain can be updated remotely over Wi-Fi, can it be hacked? Could your very memories be altered? Furthermore, military organizations like DARPA are actively exploring brain-computer interfaces for silent, thought-based battlefield communication. The risks to basic human autonomy are just as vast as the medical benefits.
And honestly, this brings up a staggering philosophical question. There's this concept called anthropocentrism. It's basically the belief that human beings are the central, most significant entities in the universe. But if humanity inevitably transitions into this connected, cyborg reality, a world where our minds are literally fused with artificial intelligence, does a human-centered philosophy even survive, or do we cross a threshold and become something else entirely?
Part 5, Unseen Shifts in Elite Markets.
So our cognitive biases don't just apply to tech billionaires, they blind us to other systemic shifts occurring entirely out of the public eye halfway across the globe. Take Bangladesh, for example. Over there has been a massive, highly visible, and often violent crackdown on traditional street drugs, specifically one called yaba. Now that's the surface level. That is what dominates the local headlines. But quietly, totally beneath the surface, a completely different market has emerged. Law enforcement is slowly realizing there is an untracked, booming rise in synthetic designer drugs, things like MDMA and ketamine, flowing specifically into affluent, elite neighborhoods like Gulshan and Banani.
And you might be wondering, how are they getting there if there's this massive crackdown? Well, they aren't using traditional street corners. These designer drugs are bypassing borders through entirely modern, high-tech infiltration vectors. We're talking international courier services dropping parcels directly at front doors. We're talking crypto field transactions that are nearly impossible to trace, highly encrypted telegram networks, and the quiet diversion of legitimate pharmaceutical supplies. This is a complete shadow market. It exists exclusively for those who already possess wealth, access, and privilege, operating right under the nose of traditional law enforcement. Because they're looking for the iceberg, but they're only seeing the tip.
Part 6, Seeking the First Principles.
So with all these complex, overlapping, and totally contradictory narratives surrounding us every day, how do we actually navigate reality? Well, a really powerful mental tool to cut through all that noise is called first principles thinking. It's actually a method heavily championed by Elon Musk himself, and it's essentially a three-step process. First, you deconstruct a problem or a viral story down to its absolute, undeniable core truths. Second, you ruthlessly strip away every single analogy and historical assumption. And third, you reconstruct a completely new, much more effective understanding or solution right from the ground up.
To make this a bit more concrete, I love looking at the famous snowmobile analogy from military strategist John Boyd. It goes like this. If you have a tank, a boat, and a bicycle, and you just try to iteratively improve them, you're basically stuck in the past. You just get a slightly better tank. But if you deconstruct them to their first principles, okay, I have metal treads, I have skis, and I have a motor, you can combine those raw fundamental elements to invent something entirely new. Boom, you've got a snowmobile. Stripping away our historical assumptions is exactly what allows us to reconstruct reality in incredibly innovative ways.
Which leads me to leave you with this final provocative thought for today. As you go out and consume media, as you look at world leaders, at new technology, and at society as a whole, are you merely optimizing the form of the stories you are told? Are you just accepting the easy analogies and falling for the halo effects? Or are you digging deep beneath the iceberg, looking for their true function and those foundational truths? Try applying first principles thinking to your own worldview this week. Question the surface level. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always keep looking beneath the surface.